Yet the boat was moving on when Koda went rigid, staring at a flooded house marked clear. Caleb killed the engine, but the crew heard only rain and loose metal. Then Koda tapped Caleb's knee and fixed on one dark attic vent. They had 3 minutes to prove the dog was right, just as the hidden signal fell silent. Keep listening. Sometimes a life is saved because someone refuses to turn away. By late afternoon, Marrow Point had stopped looking like a town. Streets had become brown channels. Mailboxes stood waist-deep in water, their red flags lifting and falling with each passing wake. Porch chairs, branches, coolers, and a single yellow rain boot drifted toward Galveston Bay, as if the stalled Gulf storm had issued them all the same silent order. Leave. Caleb Rourke leaned over the open cowling of a flat-bottom rescue boat and tightened the carburetor, fitting one final quarter turn. Rain slid from his swept-back dark brown hair and gathered in the short stubble along his square jaw. At 30, he still carried the broad, hard-built frame of the Navy SEAL he had been less than a year ago. These days, that strength mostly turned rusted bolts at the Marrow Point boatyard and lifted stranded neighbors over aluminum gunnels. He wiped the wrench on his soaked cargo pants, then checked the fuel line again. "You already did that," Lena Ortiz said. She stood at the stern in a red flotation jacket, one hand resting on the motor tiller. Lena was 47, compact and steady, with silver beginning to show in the black braid tucked beneath her rain hood. She had spent the past 2 days assigning boats, marking houses, and making decisions nobody would praise if they worked, and everybody would remember if they did not. "I checked the fitting," Caleb said. "Now I'm checking the line." Naturally. It was the closest either of them came to humor that afternoon. Koda waited beside the center bench, a 5-year-old German shepherd wearing an orange canine flotation vest. Rain darkened the black saddle of his coat and beaded along the tan fur above his eyes. A short tether connected his vest to a floor ring, long enough for him to turn and brace but not reach the side. He watched Caleb's hands with the patience of a dog accustomed to men who trusted equipment more than weather. Caleb pressed 2 fingers beneath Koda's chest strap, snug with room to breathe. He tested the handle on the vest, then the carabiner on the tether. "That too," Lena said. "Twice." Caleb looked at the dead dive watch on his left wrist. Its black hands had not moved in months. 4:17. He wore it anyway. "Fuel is clean," he said. "We can go." Lena started the motor, and the boat eased from the drowned parking lot into what had once been Bayview Road. The name remained visible on a green sign barely rising above the water. Beyond it, rooftops broke the gray distance. A church steeple, a cell tower, and the upper half of a grocery sign were the only things tall enough to make the town recognizable. The hurricane had come ashore, weakened, and then refused to leave. It sat over the Texas Gulf Coast, pulling warm water from the bay and dropping it back in endless sheets. Rainfall maps glowed purple and red on every working screen at the rescue post. Numbers that once sounded impossible had become measurements painted on walls. Caleb sat forward with a laminated search map secured beneath one knee. Green circles marked confirmed evacuations. Orange slashes marked structures searched from the exterior. A black square meant someone had been removed. There were too many marks, too many notes written over notes, but the system was all they had. They passed a brick home where a family of 4 waited at a second-floor window. Another boat was already moving toward them. Lena raised 2 fingers to its operator, received the same signal, and continued east. "Last sweep before dark," she said over the motor. "Eastern edge, then back to the Civic shelter. Wind shifts after 6. Caleb looked toward the bruised strip of sky over the bay. "It shifted 20 minutes ago." "Then we are already late." He checked the map again. The motion came without thought. Check the route, check the fuel, check the people. Follow the extraction window. Do not improvise unless the plan fails. The rules had carried him through black water, unfamiliar coastlines, and nights when a radio whisper mattered more than sight. They had also carried him home alone. Koda leaned gently against his shin as the boat struck a submerged curb. Caleb steadied the dog by the vest handle. Koda regained his footing and resumed watching the flooded houses. He did not bark at the car alarm pulsing beneath the water. He ignored a sheet of corrugated metal scraping along a fence and the sharp pop of a transformer somewhere behind them. His ears moved, cataloging each sound, then settled forward again. Caleb had begun training him for volunteer search work after leaving the service. Nothing theatrical. Koda could follow a ground scent in fair conditions, indicate a human voice or repeated impact sound, and hold light gear when given a cue. He could not identify danger through walls. He could not decide whether a structure was safe. His job was to notice. Caleb's job was to interpret. They turned between two rows of one-story homes where only the rooflines remained clear. A blue recycling bin rolled slowly in the current, struck the boat, and spun away. Lena reduced speed to keep the propeller above unseen debris. Addresses 14 through 22 show clear, she said. Medical transport request at 18 was closed before noon. Caleb followed her finger to a note on the map. Transport complete had been written beside a house near the end of the row. A green grease pencil slash marked its mailbox post, though most of the post was now underwater. Who confirmed? He asked. Dispatch list, same as the others. He nodded. A completed transport and a field mark were 2 points of confirmation, enough to move on when hundreds of roofs still waited. The boat slipped past the house at idle. It was a narrow white bungalow with gray shingles and an attic vent beneath the front gable. Floodwater pressed against the roof of the porch. A section of gutter hung loose, tapping irregularly whenever the wind lifted it. Koda rose. Caleb placed one hand on the dog's vest. Easy. Koda did not pull. His body became rigid beneath Caleb's palm. Both ears rotated toward the attic vent. The dangling gutter knocked twice, paused, then scraped across the siding. Koda ignored it. He shifted his front paws, leaned toward the gable, and touched one paw against Caleb's knee. The contact was light, deliberate. Caleb looked at the house again. What is it? Lena asked. He has something? The gutter? Koda's ears adjusted a fraction to the left. His eyes stayed on the dark slats of the vent. Lena studied the roof. That house is clear, Caleb. Maybe. Medical transport closed. Exterior marked. I heard you. He raised a closed fist, the same signal he used during training. Koda held still. The motor muttered beneath the rain. A loose shutter banged 3 houses away. Water slapped the aluminum hull, and somewhere below them, a glass bottle rolled along the pavement with a muted clink. Koda touched Caleb's knee again. Kill the motor, Caleb said. Lena looked toward the darkening sky. We have less than an hour. 10 seconds. She cut the engine. The sudden quiet was not quiet at all. Rain hammered the boat. Wind hissed through live oak branches. The gutter tapped, scraped, tapped again without rhythm. Caleb closed his eyes because sight had become useless. He rested his fingertips on Koda's shoulders and felt the dog turn toward the gable. Then the metal sound came from inside the roof. 3 short taps, a pause. 3 slow taps, spaced with effort. Another pause. 3 short taps. Caleb opened his eyes. Lena was already staring at him. Rain ran down her face, but she did not blink. SOS, he said. Koda gave a low breath through his nose. His attention never left the vent. Caleb waited for the pattern to repeat. 5 seconds passed. 10. The loose gutter struck once, then swung away. Nothing came from beneath the roof. Again, he called toward the house. If you can hear me, signal again. Only rain answered. Lena reached for the starter. We reposition, call the second boat, and approach from the back. Koda touched Caleb's knee for the 3rd time. He looked at the search map. Green slash, closed request. 2 confirmations that said nobody waited inside. Then he looked at the dog, whose whole body pointed toward one dark opening beneath the gable. Years of training had taught Caleb that procedures existed because panic lied. It had also taught him that information could arrive late, broken, or not at all. Once a voice had vanished from his radio while a clock kept moving. The watch on his wrist still showed the minute command had ordered him to leave. He folded the map. Give me 3 minutes, he said. Lena's jaw tightened. It's full tether. PFD stays fastened. You do not enter the attic until we have a second anchor. Agreed. She restarted the motor just long enough to ease the bow against the porch roof, then cut it again. Caleb clipped a rescue line to the D-ring on his flotation jacket and tested the gate with his thumb. Lena wrapped the working end around the reinforced bow cleat and locked it off. He checked her knot. She checked his clip. No argument, no pride, just the sequence. Caleb pulled a compact pry bar from the equipment box and slid one boot onto the wet porch roof. The shingles shifted beneath his weight, but held. He kept low, one hand on the gunnel, while Lena paid out 6 inches of line. Koda remained in the boat, tethered and braced between the benches. The dog watched Caleb climb, then turned his head toward the attic vent again. Caleb transferred his weight onto the roof. From somewhere below his boots came one faint metallic tap, then nothing. Caleb kept his weight low and waited for the roof to answer him. Rain ticked against the pry bar in his hand. Water pushed through the rooms below with a deep, restless murmur, but the metal tapping did not return. "I have no response," he called. Lena stood braced in the bow, both hands on his primary line. "Your 3 minutes started 30 seconds ago." Caleb looked toward the brick chimney rising near the center of the roof. Its mortar showed no fresh cracks, and the base sat above the section that had begun to sag. He crawled along the ridge rather than crossing the broad face of the shingles. Each movement was deliberate. One knee, one palm, then the other knee. The rescue line followed behind him without dragging across the vent. He looped a length of anchor webbing around the chimney base, pulled it tight, and clipped a short secondary lanyard to his flotation jacket. Only then did he move toward the gable. "Second anchor set," he said. Lena tested the line from below. "Confirmed." Koda remained between the benches, his orange vest bright against the gray water. His head tracked Caleb's movement, but when Caleb reached the attic vent, the German shepherd's ears turned back toward the dark slats beneath him. Caleb pressed the side of his face to the wet shingles. "This is rescue," he shouted. "If you can hear me, make any sound." Nothing. He tapped the roof 3 times with the rubber handle of the pry bar. The blows traveled through the framing. Koda leaned toward the house, nose lifted. For a moment, Caleb thought he felt an answer through his cheek, but the sensation vanished beneath the rain. He examined the vent and the roof around it. The wooden slats were too narrow for entry, and forcing the whole frame inward could send debris onto whoever might be below. 2 feet to the right, a patch of shingles sat slightly higher, suggesting a rafter beneath. He slid the flat end of the pry bar under the edge of one shingle and lifted carefully. "Opening a test section beside the vent," he told Lena. He removed the shingle, then another. The roof deck underneath was dark with water, but still held the point of his tool. He marked a rectangle no wider than his shoulders, checking each edge before applying pressure. The surface beneath his left hand suddenly softened. Not cracked, not shifted. Softened. The roof bowed downward beneath his palm, as if the house had taken a slow breath. Caleb pulled his hand back and moved his knee to the ridge. A line appeared in the wet shingles where the decking had separated from a rafter. "Lena, the west face is losing structure. Come off it. The ridge is holding. I have one safe approach beside the vent." "How long?" He looked at the dark seam spreading through the shingles. "Less than we thought." Lena did not waste time arguing. "Primary line is tight. I am calling our location now." Caleb shifted entirely onto the ridge and opened the marked section from above, peeling away one piece at a time. He did not swing the pry bar. He lifted, tested, and removed. Wet insulation appeared beneath the deck. He used the hooked end to pull it upward and away from the opening. A pocket of stale, warm air escaped from the attic. "Rescue!" Caleb called into the hole. "Can you hear me?" At first he saw only rafters and black water reflecting the dim sky. Then something pale moved near the far gable. A hand. Caleb widened the opening by 6 inches and angled his flashlight inside. An elderly man sat on top of a cedar storage chest, wedged between 2 rafters. Water covered the attic floor and reached almost to the lid beneath him. The collapsed upper section of a staircase floated nearby, trapped at an angle under the roof beams. The man was painfully thin. A soaked white undershirt clung to his narrow shoulders, and strands of silver hair lay flat across a high, weathered forehead. His back bent with age, but his right hand remained wrapped around a small steel wrench. Beside his hip rested a faded canvas satchel sealed inside a clear waterproof cover. His eyes found Caleb's light. "Took you long enough," he said. The words were little more than breath, but they were steady. Caleb let out the air he had been holding. "I had to park." One corner of the old man's mouth lifted. It did not last. "My name is Caleb. I am going to bring you out through this opening." "Are you hurt anywhere?" "Old everywhere." "That is not what I asked." The man looked down at himself as if conducting an inventory. "Left hip complains. It did that before the storm. Nothing new that I can tell." Caleb studied the distance between the opening and the chest. The water concealed the ceiling joists, wiring, and broken stair sections below. He could not crawl into the attic without placing his weight on a surface he could not see. The man would have to move along the chest and a narrow plywood storage shelf toward the opening. "What is your name?" Caleb asked. "Walter Hale." "Walter, I need you to stay seated while I set a harness. Can you raise both arms?" Walter lifted them slowly. His right hand still held the wrench. "You can leave that," Caleb said. Walter looked at it, almost surprised to find it there. He placed the wrench on the satchel. Useful little thing. It did its job. Caleb pulled a compact rescue harness from the pouch clipped behind his jacket. He attached it to a light tag line and lowered it through the opening. Walter followed each instruction without confusion. He drew the harness over his shoulders, brought the lower strap beneath his arms, and cinched the buckle with fingers that trembled but did not fumble. "Check the red tab," Caleb said. Walter tugged it. "Secure." Caleb connected the tagline to his secondary anchor, then called down to Lena. "I have one adult male, conscious, approximately 90, maybe older, limited mobility, no obvious new injury. Request medical team at the shelter entrance." "Copy. Second boat is 7 minutes out." The roof gave a quiet wooden groan. Walter looked up. "Do we have 7? "No." Caleb lowered himself until his chest rested across the ridge and reached through the opening. The lanyard held his hips back from the weakened section. He guided Walter off the cedar chest and onto the narrow shelf. The old man moved one knee at a time, using the tagline for balance. The canvas satchel remained on the chest. Walter glanced back at it. Caleb saw the look. "What is in the bag?" "Names. Medication?" "No." "Identification?" "Some." Walter turned toward Caleb again. "Do not trade a living man for paper." The answer settled the matter. Caleb brought Walter to the opening first. He got both hands under the harness straps, while Lena took the load through the primary line from the boat. "On my count," Caleb said. 1, 2, move." Walter pushed from the shelf. Caleb lifted and guided rather than trying to pull the man's full weight alone. Lena tightened the line from below, keeping Caleb balanced as Walter's shoulders cleared the opening. Caleb rolled him gently onto the ridge between his knees. Walter closed his eyes, breathing fast. "Stay with me," Caleb said. "Still here." The western roof face dropped half an inch with a wet snap. Caleb secured Walter's harness to the ridge sling. The canvas satchel was still visible below, less than 4 feet from the opening. He did not need to enter. He hooked its shoulder strap with the curved end of the pry bar and drew it upward. The small wrench slid across the waterproof cover, but Caleb caught both before they fell into the water. "Bag coming down," he called. Lena shifted Koda closer while keeping one hand through the handle of his PFD. Caleb lowered the canvas strap to the boat. "Koda, hold." The German shepherd opened his jaws and took the strap behind the buckle. He did not shake or pull. He simply stood braced against the bench, holding the few pounds of canvas steady while Lena kept him centered in the boat. "Good hold," Caleb said. Koda's eyes stayed on him. Caleb moved Walter down the ridge toward the porch roof. Lena used the primary line to take part of the old man's weight, while Caleb guided his boots. Walter did not pretend the descent was easy. Twice his knees folded, and twice the harness caught him before Caleb settled him back against the ridge. At the edge, Lena climbed onto the center bench and reached for Walter's flotation jacket. Caleb lowered him by the harness until his feet met the boat floor. Lena turned him sideways and seated him against the forward bench. Only after Walter was secure did Caleb retrieve the wrench, release his roof lanyard, and follow the tether down. The moment his boots touched aluminum, part of the attic roof sagged into the house behind them. No dramatic collapse followed, just a tired settling of timber that told Caleb exactly how little time they had been given. "Release," he told Koda. The dog placed the satchel at Caleb's feet. Caleb rubbed a hand once between his ears, then checked the tether and moved to Walter. Lena wrapped the old man in a dry thermal blanket and checked his pulse at the wrist. "Mr. Hale, I am Lena. We are taking you to the medical shelter." Walter looked at the water surrounding his roof. "Not the first ship I have seen take on water." "Let us make it the last," Lena said. She started the motor and eased the boat away from the house. Caleb sat on the floor beside Walter, one hand steadying the man's shoulder whenever debris rocked the hull. Koda lay across from them, alert but quiet. Walter's gaze dropped to the dead watch on Caleb's wrist. He lifted 2 fingers and tapped the face 3 times. "You heard them," he whispered. Caleb looked toward the ruined roof shrinking behind them. "Koda heard you first." Walter turned his head toward the dog. "Then he has good radio discipline." At the shelter dock, medics met the boat with a wheeled stretcher. Caleb reached for the satchel, intending to find Walter's identification and emergency contact before handing it over. He unfastened the waterproof cover and opened the canvas flap. There were no medals inside, no money, no secret military file. There was a thick, carefully wrapped notebook. Caleb opened it to the middle. Each page carried columns of names written in different inks, some followed by dates spanning decades. Beside nearly every name, in the same precise hand, appeared one word: present. The notebook was still open in Caleb's hands when the medical team rolled Walter through the shelter doors. Rain blew across the loading ramp behind them, scattering drops over the page. Caleb closed the cover before the ink could take any more water and slipped the book back into its waterproof wrap. The Marrow Point Civic Shelter had once been a recreation center. Basketball lines still crossed the floor beneath rows of folding cots. The scoreboard above the far wall showed Home 0-0 and Guests 0-0, as if the building had decided nobody should keep score during a storm. Portable generators throbbed outside. Inside, battery lanterns cast flat white pools over wet clothes, paper cups, and faces turned toward every opening door. Lena signed Walter over to the medical intake team. "I have to get the boat back to the staging lot before we lose the light," she told Caleb. "Second crew will meet me there." Caleb glanced at the windows. There was little daylight left to lose. "You are done on the water," Lena added. "I did not say I was going back out. Your face did." She pointed toward a bank of metal chairs beside the treatment area. "Sit. Dry the dog. Give the medics whatever is in that bag." Koda stood at Caleb's left knee, dripping onto the polished floor. His ears followed the stretcher as Walter disappeared behind a line of privacy screens. Caleb had already given the release command on the boat, but the German shepherd remained attentive to the canvas satchel, as if the assignment had not quite ended. "I will find the family contact," Caleb said. "Good. That is a dry mission." Lena left before he could answer. A volunteer brought 2 towels. Caleb dried Koda's back, chest, and the inside edges of the flotation vest before removing it. He checked the skin beneath each strap for rubbing, then clipped the dog's regular lead to his collar. Koda shook once, sending a fine spray over Caleb's soaked cargo pants. The volunteer stared. "He waited until I was already wet," Caleb said. Koda sat, entirely unapologetic. Caleb took the first empty chair and opened Walter's satchel across his knees. The waterproof cover had done its work. Beneath the notebook lay a clear pouch containing a state identification card, a handwritten medication list, 2 emergency contacts, and a folded photograph of a much younger Walter beside 3 other sailors. Caleb carried the pouch to the intake desk. "Walter Hale," he told the nurse, 94. "These are his medications and contacts." He said his left hip bothered him before the storm, nothing newly injured that he could identify. The nurse copied the information, then lifted the first contact sheet. "Dr. Evelyn Hale, same last name. We may already have her in the treatment wing. Family? Listed as granddaughter." Caleb nodded and returned to the chairs. His role should have ended there. Walter was alive. The medical team had his information. Caleb could wash the salt and attic dust from his hands, check the rescue boat once more, then go home to the dark apartment above the boatyard. Instead, he opened the notebook again. The first pages were older than the rest, their edges softened by years of handling. Names marched down each sheet in a disciplined hand. Some had a hometown beside them. Others carried a shipboard duty, a nickname, or a brief note no stranger could understand. Always saved the last orange, sang off-key on mid-watch, could repair anything except his own glasses. Different inks appeared as the pages advanced. Blue-black fountain pen gave way to ballpoint, then felt tip. The handwriting remained the same. Beside nearly every name was a date and one word: present. Behind the privacy screens, Walter began speaking. Arthur Bell, Samuel Price, Louis Danner. The voice was weak but measured. A pause followed each name, always the same length. A young volunteer leaned over the end of Walter's cot. "Mr. Hale, can you tell me where you are?" "Thomas Wynne, Joseph Calder." "Mr. Hale, Richard Moss." Caleb closed the notebook and stood. The volunteer met him at the edge of the screen, concern plain across her face. "He may be disoriented," she said quietly. "Exposure and exhaustion can do that, especially at his age." Caleb looked past her. Walter lay beneath 2 clean blankets, an oxygen tube resting under his nose. His eyes were closed. One hand moved against the sheet, 2 fingers tapping after every name. He was answering questions clearly in the attic, Caleb said. That can change. It was reasonable. The body protected what it could until it could not. Caleb had watched men speak calmly through an extraction and lose the thread only after the aircraft door closed. The mind waited for safety before revealing what the danger had taken. Arthur Bell, Walter repeated. Caleb checked the page. Arthur Bell appeared near the top. So did Samuel Price, Louis Danner, and every name that followed. They are in the notebook, he said. The volunteer looked from Caleb to Walter. Maybe it is helping him orient. Fast footsteps crossed the gym floor behind them. A woman in dark blue medical scrubs came through the treatment entrance, pulling off a disposable rain poncho as she walked. She was in her early 40s, with warm brown skin, dark hair twisted into a practical knot, and faint lines around eyes that had learned to examine a room before allowing themselves to react. Her shoes were wet to the ankles. A stethoscope bounced against her chest. "Walter Hale?" she asked. The nurse pointed toward the cot. The woman reached Walter in 3 quick steps and took his hand. "Granddad, it is Evelyn." Walter's fingers stopped tapping. His eyes opened. "You missed Arthur," he said. Relief loosened Evelyn's face, followed almost immediately by irritation. "I have spent 9 hours treating people who ignored evacuation orders. You do not get to become number 10. Transport never came. I know. The road closed before they reached you." She pressed his hand against her cheek for 1 brief second, then returned to being a doctor. "Do you know where you are?" "Civic Shelter, West Gym. Generator outside has a bad bearing." The volunteer glanced toward the wall as the generator produced a faint, uneven rattle. "Tell me what day it is, where you are, and what brought you here," Evelyn said. Walter correctly named the day, the Civic Shelter, and the storm that had trapped him. Evelyn asked 2 more questions, then checked the monitor and spoke quietly with the nurse. "He is not confused," she told them. "He is doing roll call." Caleb held up the notebook. "This?" Evelyn's gaze settled on the book, then on the canvas satchel at his feet. "You brought it out. It was within reach after he was secured." "Thank you." She said it without ceremony, the way exhausted people thanked someone when the full weight of the alternative was still too near. He would have left it if you told him to. But losing it would have taken something from him I could not replace. Walter closed his eyes again. "Still talking about me like I'm not in the room. Then stop pretending to sleep." His mouth moved in something close to a smile. Evelyn led Caleb a few steps away from the cot. Koda rose and came with him, then settled when Caleb stopped. "My grandfather was a Navy radio man during the Second World War," Evelyn said. "Pacific duty, aboard a destroyer escort. The ship and everyone on it became the center of his world before he was old enough to understand how small the world really was." After the war, Walter and several veterans around Galveston Bay began meeting once a month. At first, they read the names of men who had not returned. As the decades passed, they added the names of those who came home, built families, grew old, and eventually joined the first list. "One person reads," Evelyn explained. "The others answer, present in memory. That is what the word means in the book. It is the response." Caleb looked down at the pages. "How many are left?" "In the original group?" Evelyn glanced at Walter. "Only him." The statement carried no music, no attempt to make Walter larger than he was. There were no famous operations in the notebook, no decorations displayed for effect. Just names, small human notes, and the same careful response written again and again by a man who had outlived everyone expected to answer aloud. "The Veterans Center closed for repairs months ago," Evelyn continued. "Granddad kept doing roll call at home, every evening. He says a name does not need a crowd, it needs a witness." An oscillating fan at the edge of the treatment area turned toward them. Its breeze lifted the top corner of the open notebook. Several pages fluttered forward in quick flashes of cream and blue ink. Then the book fell open near the back. The last written page held only 1 ruled line. No name, no date. Above it, in Walter's precise block letters, were 2 words: "Next Keeper." The fan turned away. The page settled flat. Caleb stared at the empty line longer than he intended. "He has been looking for someone," Evelyn said. "Family should keep it." I offered. "He said no?" "He said I remember because I love him. That is not the same reason he remembers." Evelyn folded her arms, not defensive, simply tired of an argument she had already held many times. He does not care about rank. He does not want a local official, a historian, or somebody who likes ceremonies. He wants someone who understands what happens when a name is allowed to disappear. Caleb shut the notebook. The sound was sharper than he meant it to be. "I pulled him out of a roof," he said. "That is the mission I accepted. I did not ask you to accept another." "Good." Evelyn studied him, then gave a small nod. She did not chase him with gratitude or try to turn the rescue into destiny. That made it harder to dismiss her. Caleb slid the notebook back into its waterproof cover. As he reached for the satchel, the dead watch shifted on his wrist. The laminated memorial card slipped nearly halfway free beneath the black strap, exposing one complete printed line. Benjamin Calloway, U.S. Navy. From the cot, Walter's tapping stopped. His eyes opened and fixed on Caleb's wrist. "Benjamin Calloway," he said. The shelter seemed to contract around the name. Caleb had never spoken it in that building. He had never spoken it to Lena, to Evelyn, or to anyone in Marrow Point. Caleb's hand closed over the sliver of laminated paper beneath his watch. "How do you know that name?" Walter lifted 2 fingers from the blanket and pointed. The movement cost him enough that his hand fell back before it reached Caleb's wrist. "You are carrying it," he said. Caleb looked down. Rain had softened the protective sleeve beneath the black nylon strap, allowing the memorial card to slide nearly halfway free. Walter had seen the same complete line Caleb now saw against his skin. Benjamin Calloway, U.S. Navy. He pushed the card beneath the strap until nothing remained visible. Evelyn watched the motion but did not ask. That restraint felt more dangerous than curiosity. "Ben Calloway served with me," Caleb said. Walter waited. "That is all." "No," Walter replied. "That is what fits in one sentence." His eyes closed again, but not in dismissal. He was saving strength. The monitor beside him kept a quiet electronic rhythm while rain washed over the shelter roof. Caleb should have left. Lena had ordered him off the water, not into a conversation. Walter needed rest. Evelyn had patience. Koda needed food and a dry place. Each fact offered a clean exit. Instead, Caleb stood beside the cot with his thumb pressed over the face of a watch that had struck concrete during the withdrawal and stopped at 4:17. "We were pulling out," he said. Weather closed the extraction window. Command changed the route. Evelyn moved toward the foot of the cot, giving him room without leaving Walter unattended. "Ben was covering the south approach," Caleb continued. "A wall came down between his position and ours. We still had radio contact. He said he could move east and meet us past the next block." He could hear the words exactly as Ben had spoken them. No panic, a little breathless. Almost annoyed that concrete had changed the plan. "The route east became inaccessible," Caleb said. "Command ordered the team to withdraw. I requested another minute. They denied it." Walter's fingers moved once against the sheet, a small signal to continue. "I followed the order." There it was. The sentence Caleb had spent months circling without touching. He did not describe what happened after. He did not need to. The silence following Ben's last transmission had outlived every sound around it. Walter opened his eyes. "And you remember every word?" "Yes." "Then forgetting is not your problem." Caleb's jaw tightened. "I did not say it was." "You did not have to." Walter drew a careful breath. Men who are afraid of forgetting speak names. Men who believe they owe a debt sometimes make a shrine out of silence. Caleb looked toward the shelter doors. "You do not know what I owe." "No." Walter's answer came without offense. "And I will not decide it from a cot. I only know silence is a poor payment unless the man asked you for it." Ben had asked for many things over the years. Extra coffee, a clean frequency. $20 after losing a card game he insisted had been unfair. Never silence. Evelyn picked up the canvas satchel and carried it to an unused treatment table. "The outside needs to dry before mildew gets into the seams." She loosened the waterproof cover and spread the wet canvas beneath the warm airflow from a portable vent. The folded fabric opened with a soft slap. The smell reached Caleb before he saw the water run from it. Wet canvas, machine oil from the wrench, salt carried inland from the bay. For one suspended second, the civic shelter disappeared. He was back inside a cramped staging compartment beneath red lights, shoulder to shoulder, with men checking radios and buckles. Diesel hung in the air. Sea spray had dried white on their sleeves. Ben sat across from him, tightening a bootlace, then looked up and tapped 2 fingers against his watch. Move-in 5. Caleb's hand clamped around the dead watch until the edge pressed into bone. Koda rose from beside the chair and leaned against his leg. Not urgently, he simply placed the solid weight of his shoulder there and waited. The shelter returned in pieces. Generator vibration, wet shoes on the gym floor, Evelyn smoothing the canvas flat. Caleb released the watch. "You should sit down," Evelyn said. "I am fine." That answer has never convinced a medical professional. "I am not your patient." "Then consider it free advice." Walter's mouth moved beneath the oxygen tube. "She charges family." It was a thin joke, but it broke the pressure in the air. Evelyn adjusted his blanket with more force than necessary. "Rest," she told him. Caleb sat in the metal chair. Koda settled across his boots, preventing him from pretending the decision had been entirely his own. 20 minutes later, Lena returned in dry coveralls borrowed from the shelter supply room. Her braid was still wet, and a dark crescent of fatigue lay beneath each eye. She carried a tablet sealed in a clear case. "Boat is staged," she said. "Wind shut down the eastern route. Nobody goes back until morning." Caleb looked at Walter. "Do we know why his house showed clear?" Lena pulled a second chair beside him. "I checked." Walter's transport request had been assigned to a medical van before the water crossed the access road. When the van turned back, its route was closed in the dispatch system. A volunteer later copied the closed status into the exterior sweep list, believing it meant transport complete. Another crew saw the list and marked the mailbox from their boat. "2 correct actions built on 1 wrong assumption," Lena said. "Nobody lied. Nobody skipped the route. The information changed meaning as it moved." Caleb pictured the neat green slash on the map. "We need separate codes for canceled and completed." The explanation should have made the mistake easier to hold. There was no careless rescuer to blame, no single decision he could point to and repair. Instead, each person had followed the information in front of them until a living man disappeared between 2 definitions of the word closed. Caleb had spent most of his adult life trusting that a clear report meant someone had checked what needed checking. Now he could still feel Koda's paw against his knee, asking him to look once more at a house the paperwork had already finished with. Already sent to Incident Command. They are rechecking every medical transport marked before the road closures. How many? Enough. It was not an answer, but it was the only one she had time to give. Lena turned toward Walter. "Mr. Hale, crews reached the Veterans Center during the last sweep. The first floor is underwater. The display room took most of it." Walter's eyes opened slowly. "The bell?" "They saw it down behind the cabinet. Nobody entered. The structure is closed until inspection." Caleb expected Walter to ask them to go back. The wrench and notebook had survived because he had held them above rising water. The old brass bell had likely carried the same weight of memory. Walter only nodded. "Then it stays where it is. We may recover it after the water drops," Lena said. "If it is safe." "If it is safe," she agreed. He looked toward the notebook resting beside the drying satchel. "A bell helps people listen. It is not the reason we speak." Evelyn followed his gaze. "Granddad, you need to conserve your energy. That is why I would like the names read once more while I can hear them." The request was quiet. It did not carry the force of a final order or the performance of a last wish. Walter might recover, the storm might pass, the bell might be found. But a man who had watched 94 years move beneath him understood that later was never a guarantee. Evelyn lifted the notebook and opened it near the final page. "You wrote this months ago." Walter looked at the words, "Next Keeper." "I was old months ago, too. Why did you not tell me?" "I told you. You told me I read too quickly." "You do." Evelyn gave him the same look she had used after finding him in the shelter. Love sharpened by exhaustion. Walter turned his head toward Caleb. A name should not be rushed. Caleb felt the empty line at the back of the book, waiting like an open door he had no intention of entering. "Your granddaughter knows the list," he said. "She knows every name because she loves me." "That sounds like enough." "It is enough for family." Walter paused to gather breath. "The keeper needs to understand the silence after a radio goes still." Lena glanced at Caleb. Evelyn did not. She kept her attention on Walter, allowing him to say what he had chosen without helping him corner the man beside her. Caleb stood, moving Koda gently from his boots. "I understand rescue," he said. I understand getting someone from danger to safety. I do not know the men in that book. I did not serve beside them, and I have no right to stand in their place. The reader does not stand in their place, Walter said. He makes a place for them. Find someone else. Walter studied him for several seconds. Perhaps I will. No accusation, no disappointment. That should have made the refusal easier. Caleb reached for Koda's lead. The monitor beside Walter changed pitch. Evelyn turned before anyone else moved. Walter's breath caught, then shortened. The nurse at the next station crossed the space quickly and checked the screen. I need room, she said. Evelyn shifted into clinical motion, lowering the cot and reaching for the oxygen control. Lena pulled the chairs back. Caleb took Koda by the harness and stepped behind the privacy line. The curtain closed between him and Walter. The curtain remained closed for 11 minutes. Caleb counted every one of them on the wall clock above the shelter scoreboard. He stood with Koda beside the medical station, while nurses moved in and out, carrying equipment without urgency but without wasted motion. Lena stayed near the radio table. Evelyn never appeared beyond the curtain. At last, the nurse who had asked for room stepped out. He is stable, she said. Exhaustion caught up with him. He needs 20 minutes of quiet, then I will reassess him. No speeches unless I clear it. The second half was directed through the curtain, where Walter was apparently awake enough to object. That was not a speech, he said faintly. The nurse turned her head. It becomes a speech when everyone else has to stop what they are doing. Caleb heard Evelyn murmur something, followed by Walter's unwilling silence. The shelter settled into night around them. Rain worked steadily against the roof. Volunteers lowered the gym lights to conserve power, leaving the treatment area and operations table under battery lanterns. Families gathered near a radio speaker at center court, while the communications coordinator read road closures, shelter capacities, and the locations of morning water deliveries. Caleb clipped Koda's lead to his belt and began repacking the dog's flotation vest. There would be no more boat work until daylight, but equipment left wet became equipment that failed later. He opened each buckle, wiped the webbing, and laid it flat beneath a vent. From behind the privacy curtain came 3 light taps against metal. Koda's head rose. The German shepherd listened, then stood and touched one paw to Caleb's boot. The motion was the same deliberate indication he had given in the boat. Caleb looked toward the curtain. 3 taps came again. He is using the bed rail, Evelyn said as she stepped out. Apparently, almost losing the privilege of speaking has not reduced his need to communicate. What does he want? The notebook? Caleb glanced toward the canvas satchel. The nurse said, quiet. He does not want to read the whole list himself. He wants to know somebody heard it. Evelyn folded her arms against the cool air from the portable vent. He has done roll call alone for months. Tonight he nearly became another name without anyone answering. Caleb looked at the shelter radio. The coordinator was finishing a check-in with a church shelter north of the flooded highway. How long is the list? He asked. The full book would take hours. He marked 12 names before the storm. Men from the original group whose families still live around the bay. Why those 12? He rotates them. Everyone gets remembered. Nobody becomes a monument that blocks the rest. Caleb understood the discipline in that. Memory with a schedule. Grief given a boundary so it did not claim every hour. He carried the notebook to the operations table and waited until the coordinator finished the emergency check. Lena watched him approach but did not speak first. Can you ask Incident Command for the last 5 minutes of the next shelter net? Caleb said. For what? Roll call, 12 names. Medical says Walter should not do all of them. Lena studied him long enough to make sure the request was not impulse disguised as a plan. Emergency traffic clears first. Every shelter has to opt in. Communications coordinator controls the net. Agreed. And if command says no, then we read them in this room. Lena looked toward the closed curtain. I will ask. 20 minutes later, the nurse reassessed Walter and allowed him to speak for no more than 2 minutes at a time, with the oxygen in place and Evelyn monitoring him. He was to stop at the first sign of strain. Incident Command then approved a brief memorial after the scheduled status round, provided no emergency traffic was waiting. 4 shelters opted in. Evelyn wrote the traditional response on a sheet of cardboard and held it near the radio table so everyone understood the words before the first name was spoken. Present in memory. They moved Walter's cot just outside the treatment curtain. He remained beneath the blankets, the oxygen tube in place, his face colorless with fatigue. Evelyn sat on one side, close enough to stop him if his breathing changed. Caleb placed the notebook on an adjustable tray across the cot. Koda lay on the floor near Walter's feet. The dog had no interest in ceremonies. He watched Caleb, listened to the radio, and rested his chin between his paws whenever neither required attention. The communications coordinator completed the final shelter check. "No emergency traffic pending," she said. "Marrow Point Civic, you have the net for 5 minutes." Lena handed Walter the microphone. He held it with both hands. The tremor in his fingers disappeared once he pressed the transmit key. "This is Walter Hale," he said. His voice traveled through the gym speaker and into 4 shelters around Galveston Bay. "United States Navy, radio man. Tonight we remember those who can no longer answer for themselves." He looked at the first marked name. "Arthur Bell." Evelyn nodded to the people in the gym. "Present in memory," they answered. The phrase returned through the speaker from the first shelter, then the second. The responses were not perfectly timed. One voice arrived late. Another carried static. That made them sound less like a performance and more like what they were. Strangers choosing for a few minutes to help an old man keep watch. Walter read the next name. Samuel Price. Present in memory. He continued. Louis Danner, who had saved the last orange. Joseph Calder, who sang off-key on mid-watch. Richard Moss, who could repair anything except his own glasses. Walter did not read the notes aloud, but Caleb saw them on the page. The names stopped being entries and began to occupy small spaces in the room. Walter reached the 6th line. His forefinger moved beneath the handwriting, keeping his place. It traveled halfway across the page and stopped. The rest of him stopped with it. His mouth opened, but no sound came. The microphone remained near his lips. Evelyn leaned forward, watching his face and the monitor at once. "Granddad," she said quietly, "release the key." Walter's thumb lifted from the transmit button. The radio fell silent. No alarm sounded. No one rushed the cot. Walter had simply reached the limit his body had been warning him about all evening. Evelyn took the microphone. "Marrow Point Civic, temporary pause." Caleb stepped closer. "Can he continue?" "He should not." Walter's eyes moved toward the notebook. His finger still rested beneath the unfinished line. Caleb knew that look. A task remained open. He removed the microphone from Walter's hand and sat on the other side of the cot. The communications coordinator nodded when the net was ready. Caleb pressed the key. "Marrow Point Civic, resuming roll call." His voice came out clipped and level, shaped for a radio report. He read the 6th name exactly as written. The shelters answered. He read the 7th. At first, he kept his eyes on the paper. Then he began noticing the notes. A carpenter who built ramps for neighbors after his knees failed. A cook who sent birthday cards to every member's children. A quiet man remembered because he always arrived early to set out chairs. By the 9th name, Caleb no longer sounded like he was reporting coordinates. He paused long enough after each response to look at Walter. The old man listened with his eyes closed, breathing steadily while Evelyn held his wrist. The final marked name belonged to someone who had carried peppermint in his shirt pocket for 50 years. "Present in memory," the shelters answered. Caleb released the transmit key. The assigned 12 were complete. He could return the microphone, close the book, and let the net end exactly as approved. Instead, he turned back through the notebook to the final page of recorded names. Beneath the last entry waited an unused ruled line. The separate page marked "Next Keeper" remained blank behind it. Caleb took the pen Evelyn offered him. He wrote slowly, because a name should not be rushed. Benjamin Calloway. The letters looked unfamiliar in his own hand. He had carried the memorial card against his wrist for months. He had read the name alone in dark rooms, never aloud, as if silence could keep the last radio transmission from becoming final. Caleb pressed the key. "One additional name," he said. "Benjamin Calloway, United States Navy." Static filled the speaker. The pause lasted only 2 seconds, but it opened wider than the years behind it. Then a voice from the North Shelter answered. "Present in memory." The church shelter followed, then the county annex, then the high school gym. Finally, the people around Caleb spoke the words together. "Present in memory." Koda rose at the change in Caleb's voice and walked to the cot. He rested his chin on the edge near Walter's hand. Walter moved his fingers across the blanket until they touched the fur between the dog's ears. Caleb ended the transmission and returned the microphone. No relief swept through him. Ben did not become easier to lose. The order to withdraw did not change, and the dead watch did not start. Caleb still remembered the radio going quiet, but the silence no longer belonged to him alone. Walter reached across the tray and tapped 3 times against Caleb's knuckles. "Now somebody else carries his name," he whispered. Caleb looked at the line he had added to the roll call. Then he unfastened the black strap from his wrist. For the first time since 4/17, he took off the watch. He placed it beside the notebook and left both where Walter could see them. 3 weeks after the storm, Walter Hale walked into the Marrow Point boatyard behind a silver walker and complained that Caleb had placed the coffee machine too far from the chairs. "It has been there for 6 years, Caleb said. "Then you have had 6 years to correct it?" Evelyn followed him through the open bay door, carrying a paper bag from the pharmacy, and the expression of a doctor who had already lost this argument twice. Walter wore pressed khaki pants, a pale blue shirt, and shoes with non-slip soles. He was thinner than he had been before the flood, but color had returned to his face. Every step remained measured. He did not hide the effort. Koda left his mat beside the workbench and approached at a walk. Walter stopped, braced both hands on the walker, and waited. The German shepherd sniffed the cuffs of his pants, then pressed his head beneath Walter's palm. "Good radio, man," Walter said. Koda accepted the promotion without visible excitement. The boatyard still showed the storm in 100 small ways. Water stains crossed the cinder block wall 2 feet above the floor. 3 outboard motors waited on stands for parts. A stack of warped plywood leaned beside the scrap bin. Across Marrow Point, roofs wore blue tarps, drywall filled curbside piles, and portable fans hummed through open windows. Caleb had spent most days repairing rescue boats, and most evenings helping Lena revise the search forms. Canceled transport, failed access, and confirmed evacuation now had separate codes. No request could be closed without a second line explaining why. He still woke before dawn some mornings, with his hand reaching for the watch that was no longer on his wrist. He still heard Ben's final transmission when rain struck metal in the wrong rhythm. The difference was that he no longer stayed at the workbench until his body shut down from exhaustion. He went upstairs. He fed Koda. On 2 difficult nights, he called the number a former teammate had given him instead of letting the phone sit face down. Walter lowered himself into the chair nearest the coffee machine, proving that the distance had not been fatal. Evelyn placed the pharmacy bag beside him. 10 minutes, she said. Then we leave. She has confused recovery with imprisonment, Walter told Caleb. I heard that, Evelyn said. Good hearing runs in the family. Caleb poured coffee into 3 paper cups. Evelyn accepted hers. Walter was allowed only the small cup she had brought from home, which he regarded as a personal insult. I came to return something, Walter said. He opened the pharmacy bag and removed the little steel wrench from the attic. Lena had cleaned the surface but left a rust-colored mark near the jaw. Walter laid it across his palms. This belonged to my kitchen drawer, he said, which means it belonged to nobody until the water came in. Then it became a radio. Caleb took it. The tool was ordinary, light enough to disappear among 100 others in the shop. You should keep it, he said. I did. For 94 years, I kept more things than I needed. Walter nodded toward a narrow wooden box Evelyn carried under one arm. That is the other reason we came. Evelyn placed the box on the workbench. Inside lay the roll call notebook, now protected by archival sleeves. A local library volunteer had scanned every page. The original would remain with Walter until the new weather-resistant copy was finished. He opened to the back. Benjamin Calloway's name appeared beneath the last entry, written in Caleb's hand. On the separate final page, the words, Next Keeper, waited above an empty line. Walter uncapped a pen and placed it across the page, pointing the tip toward Caleb. You do not have to decide today, Caleb said. I decided whom to ask before I came, Walter replied. The answer is still yours. Caleb looked from the pen to the name he had added during the storm. I will carry it. He picked up the pen and wrote Caleb Rourke on the line, slowly enough that each letter held its shape. Walter took the pen afterward and added Koda in smaller print beneath it. He does not read, Caleb said. He listens. Caleb ran his thumb along the edge of the page. The entry did not appoint him commander of anything. It came with no uniform, no office, and no authority over the lives recorded before it. His responsibility was smaller, and, for that reason, harder to hide inside. Open the book, speak carefully, and remain long enough to hear the answer. Walter had reduced remembrance to a task simple enough to perform and serious enough not to postpone. The coffee smelled stronger than Caleb expected. He lifted his cup and took a swallow. The taste stopped him. Burned, bitter enough to dry his mouth, with the scorched edge of a pot left on the warmer too long. For months before the flood, coffee had been heat and routine, nothing more. He drank it because morning required a cup in his hand. He could not remember the last time it had tasted good or bad. He took another cautious sip. "This is terrible," he said. Evelyn examined her cup. "I thought that was intentional." Walter smiled. "First correct medical assessment she has made all week." Evelyn glanced at Caleb. She seemed to understand that he was not talking only about coffee, but she let the moment remain small. "Move the machine closer to the chairs, and perhaps the quality will improve." Caleb poured the pot down the utility sink. A few days later, he carried his dead dive watch to a repair shop across the bay. The technician offered to replace the watermarked face and polish the case. Caleb declined. He asked only that the mechanism run again. When the shop called him back, the black hands moved past 417 without resistance. The stain beneath the crystal remained. Caleb slid Ben's memorial card behind the strap, fastened the watch around his wrist, and listened to the quiet ticking until it became part of the room. The months that followed did not transform Marrow Point all at once. Recovery came house by house. A reopened grocery aisle, a porch rebuilt 2 boards at a time. The Veterans Center required more work than expected, and the old brass bell was recovered only after an inspector cleared the structure. Salt water had split its mounting bracket and left the bell too fragile for regular use. Walter chose to display it rather than force another sound from it. By the next storm season, Caleb had converted an unused boatyard storage building into a training structure. Its raised platforms, removable wall panels, and hidden compartments allowed rescue volunteers to practice locating people without entering real floodwater. Koda stood at the entrance wearing his orange PFD. A volunteer waited behind an interior panel and tapped a wrench against a pipe in uneven bursts. Koda listened, dismissed the first sounds, then turned toward the panel when the pattern repeated. He touched Caleb's knee. Caleb raised one hand. The team stopped. "Dog indication gives us a direction," he told them. "It does not give us permission to enter. Confirm the sound. Check the structure. Establish primary and secondary safety before opening anything." A volunteer used a listening device against the wall. Another checked the panel supports. Only after both confirmed did Caleb authorize the opening. Koda received a quiet, "good," and a short tug game, then returned to his mat. No cameras waited outside. Nobody gave him a medal. The value of the work was that the next person beneath a roof might be found before the signal stopped. Near the end of the season, families gathered on a modest public pier overlooking Galveston Bay. The crowd was small: rescue volunteers, relatives of veterans, shelter workers, and several people who had answered through the radio on the night of the flood. Folding chairs faced the water. A new brass bell hung from a plain cedar frame. Walter sat in the front row with his walker folded beside him. Evelyn adjusted the blanket across his knees, then sat at his right. Their ease held no ceremony. She handed him water before he asked, and he complained that the bottle was too cold. Lena stood near the communications volunteers. Koda waited at Caleb's left side without a vest, his lead loose between them. Caleb placed the weather-resistant copy of the roll call on a lectern. The original remained in its wooden box at Walter's home. Inside the new volume, the old notes had been preserved exactly as written. The last orange, the off-key singing, the peppermint carried for 50 years. Ben's name appeared near the end. There was no speech about heroes, no promise that memory erased grief. Caleb looked across the people gathered there and understood that none of them had come to erase anything. They had come to answer. He lifted the small steel wrench Walter had given him and tapped the new bell 3 times. The notes traveled across the pier, clear and evenly spaced. Koda's ears rose. He turned toward the sound, then looked up at Caleb. The dog waited for a cue, ready to work if the signal required it. Caleb rested one hand briefly between his ears. He looked at Walter. The old radio man sat straighter, both hands folded over the top of his cane. Evelyn watched Caleb with the calm attention she brought to every difficult moment, offering no push and no rescue from what came next. Caleb opened the book. He read the first name. "Present in memory," the gathering answered. He read another and another. When he reached Benjamin Calloway, his voice tightened but did not stop. The answer came back from the pier. Present in memory. Caleb let the words cross the water before moving to the next line. This time, no one was waiting beneath the water for Caleb to hear them, but he listened anyway. Caleb did not leave the storm without scars, and Walter did not walk away from the flood suddenly young again. Healing did not erase the order Caleb had followed, the radio that had gone silent, or the years Walter had spent watching his circle grow smaller. What changed was the burden of carrying those memories alone. Walter showed Caleb that remembrance is not a monument built for famous people. It can be as simple as opening a book, speaking one name carefully, and waiting long enough for someone else to answer. Evelyn showed that love can protect without controlling. Lena showed that even good systems must be questioned when a living signal says the paperwork may be wrong. And Koda never needed to understand Morse code, war, or grief. He only needed to notice what the people around him had almost missed. First, it was a faint pattern beneath a flooded roof. Later, it was the change in Caleb's voice. His loyalty reminds us that comfort does not always arrive with an explanation. Sometimes it stands beside us, listens, and refuses to move away. There may be a name you have avoided because speaking it feels too painful. You do not need a ceremony or a crowd. Today you might call someone who remembers that person too. Tell one story. Write the name down. Or simply sit with somebody whose silence has lasted too long and let them know they do not have to carry it alone. Whether we call it grace, providence, or the quiet mercy of being found at the right moment, miracles are not always loud. Sometimes they sound like 3 weak taps in a storm, and one person willing to listen. If this story touched you, share it with a veteran, rescuer, or friend who may need to hear that memory, and healing can live together. In the comments, you can write "present in memory" for someone whose name you still carry. And subscribe, turn on notifications, and join us for more stories of courage, loyalty, and hope.